after the longest agitation? And I think so there are different questions, but we'll come back to it. Which also reminds me of something that I must quote. In a Bharat Krishak Samaj convened food systems dialogue, when the agitation was on, we had called a former chief of the research and analysis wing, RAW, who had earlier been the police chief in Haryana. And the question that was posed to him was, why do farmer agitations only lead to a status quo? Exactly like this agitation. There was a status quo, the laws that had come into place were put aside. And his answer was that farmer leaders have not been trained in the power of negotiation. So he said that you will find these agitations in all states, as your book talks about the Jat agitation, the Maratha agitation, or in different forms in Rajasthan, you have these agitations everywhere, but it leads to a status quo. And so if you could, you want to use the dais, I mean, you could do there, you could do it, whatever. Thank you so much. So we'll give opportunity to each of the panelists, and then we'll look at Sudhirji to respond to some of the points that they may raise. Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I feel very emotional, Sudhir, but as an economist, I must confess, we put everything other than what is rational behavior, which means you're optimizing your whole utility function, whatever that might be, everything into behavior. So behavioral is an economist term for what you call emotional. Let me first start out by saying that the reason I enjoyed reading this book, or for that matter, the reason I like to read almost any literature that comes out on this aspect of Indian economy, because what I think is happening is these are symptoms of a deeper malaise. These are symptoms, what we are reading. The deeper malaise is something else. The fact that 86% farmers across the country were not supportive of this agitation. As Ajay very rightly motivated the talk by saying this was limited to one region. There is a reason for it. Then of course, when the agitation was going on, I was also trying to understand who can. So I looked at could it be unemployment, right? Because that was one of the theories floated, that it's unemployment rate. But you know, Punjab's unemployment, Haryana's unemployment, Western UP, this is the northern upper Ganga region, the unemployment in this region is far, far lower than the national average. Then the issue was, could this be younger population? No, these are a lot older than the average all India population. Bihar is younger, Eastern UP is younger, Assam is younger. So it's not age, it's none of these pre-held theories we were trying to understand. So clearly there is something much more happening. Now let me add to the context. Agitations, again, like I said, were a symptom, but the deeper, when I say deeper malaise, what do I mean by that? You know, while the rest of the country, we are doing everything possible to industrialize. Because unlike the pre-held belief that India will be a special economic case where we will transition from agriculture to services, it has never happened historically. There is no reason why an economy of 1.42 billion will do that either. So industrialization is where the jobs are. That's a reality number one. But while the rest of the country is trying to industrialize, there is one state in India which has actively deindustrialized in the last 20 years. Punjab. When we were in school, all our sports equipments, bicycles, knitwear, everything came from Punjab. Today, nothing comes from Punjab. I'm trying to make a deeper point here, which is, you know, the policies of the years where we try to appease farmers by doing short-term transfers, which is in the form of very cheap power. At the expense, somebody has to pay for that power. So who is paying for the additional cost of power so that farmers get it free? Industry. And over time, as is the reality of economic rational decision making, industries will move And they did. They didn't go to China, Vietnam. They went to Himachal Pradesh, they went to Rajasthan, they went to Tamil Nadu. As a result of which, now imagine the long-term prospect of the state economy. Many of our states are agriculture dependent, mind you. But we all know that the future of agriculture, raising productivity, greater modernization, all of that will not lead to more jobs in farming. The jobs are not going to come from there. The jobs will be when there is movement away. It could be into processing or whatever, but not in cultivation, right? Now imagine the stress of the state economy where we have the regime of MSP. Also the conversation around MSP is so narrow that we are not considering the longer term ecological costs. In fact, when you begin to look at MSP, we say, "Ye to bahut hi superficial formula hai. 50% just add on top of the cost, and that is what we transfer," as if ecological costs are non-existent. Do you know the one state in India which is actively desertified is Punjab, because the water table has fallen so low on account of indiscriminate pulling out of water from the soil. So there are certain idiosyncrasies which I think policies of the years, the decades, have only accentuated the problem. There is only one state in India where we have also run a larger mental health survey. It's Punjab. You know, when most economic planning also happens because there is a future to aspire to. You are catering or you're thinking about what is the possibility, future likelihood of jobs. What are young people going to do? In Punjab, it's a stunning lack of hope, which is very closely linked with a lot of these mental health issues. Right? Every household has one addict. The addiction center, therefore. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the state economy of Punjab should not be analyzed or tried to equate with even the region. Because what is happening in UP, Himachal, Haryana is also very different. Haryana, on account of the fact that there is such rapid urbanization. Do you know that Punjab was the richest state in India 20 years back? Highest per capita income. Today, it's poorer than all its neighbors. An average Haryanavi used to be poorer 20 years back. Today, an average Haryanavi is 2 times, 2.3% to be precise. So Ajay, what he mentioned about farmers, he definitely holds as far as per capita income of states are concerned. So this is a call, this is a cry for help. I don't think it is limited to just farming. I think this is a symptom, the deeper malaise or the disease lies elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We discussed these points, but of course Punjab is not receiving help from the union government because the deindustrialization didn't take place because of farmers, it actually took place because of terrorism. That the industry actually fled Punjab. I am from Punjab, so it's something of an emotive issue for me. And thereafter, Shamika, what happened is once terrorism was brought under control, then economic incentives were given to the hill states for industries to come in terms of sales tax and excise duty exemption. So whatever residual industry was left went to Baddi, went to Jammu and all those adjoining places. But we'll continue this. I'll come back to Mikla, it's your turn, and let's try and avoid Punjab. Right?
Yeah. In fact, I was going to say that we come back to Punjab because I think you mentioned the political economy and moral economy, and in a complex federal democracy like India, there are very specific histories of the engagement with the union government, right? And so the Punjab story, both the MSP story, the deindustrialization story, the point about terrorism, all of this needs to be understood in context, and it's a very complex thing we should unpack. But let me start by congratulating you first, and also to your family who's here.
Yes.
We were saying that it takes many people to bring a book about, and so that's wonderful. So many congratulations for writing this important book, and I'll talk more specifically about the book, but I also want to thank Ajay Thakur and Bharat Krishak Samaj for hosting this discussion as also for hosting many other discussions that many people shy away from today, particularly discussions which need to bring diverse perspectives together. There is a point in the book where Sudhir says, we can discuss whether, again, the dynamics of the negotiation, but where you say the government realized too late certain things about the way in which things could have been communicated, deliberation could have been done, how this could have been done better. But also the farmers realized that the MSP and regulation story could have been separated. But by then it was very deep into taking positions, right? And that by that point it wasn't really up for negotiation. And we know that it wasn't possible to have a negotiation. So part of the book talks about how difficult it was to actually negotiate, although there was a process. And I think all of us in the country watched that process with some hope at various points, because there was also engagement. And I think you discussed the fact that it broke down. And I think Tony Judd, a very important historian, often says it's not in the end whether you disagree or agree on a particular legislation. It is about how you discuss and deliberate your shared interests. And agricultural markets are deep sites of contestation, but they are also sites of shared interest. And we haven't figured out, I think, on too many policies as a country, how best to discuss and deliberate on our shared interests. And that's why I'm grateful for these kinds of forums, because I think Bharat Krishak Samaj has held that notion that if we keep the space for deliberation, as you say, actually the distance closes, and you can actually have both technical and economic and political and emotional discussions, right? That these are not separate. So I think it's very important that we do take the time to discuss these. I think what was so important about the book, both as a record and, as you say, many people have covered this movement because it was so extraordinary. And it's been covered by artists, by filmmakers, by social activists, and by political scientists, by anthropologists. We've all kind of written about it, and it captured an imagination, and it was a certain kind of energy, right? It was also such a fraught time, and it was unprecedented on so many levels. But I think what you've tried to do is to bring context to it, and historical context, both, as you mentioned, the waves of farmers' protests, so not only colonial and early post-colonial movements, but also you reminded us of a range of movements from 2016 onwards, right? And so a context where this had been building up. So even the emergence of the coalition of unions, which became possible and responded for a whole range of reasons, and there's still idiosyncrasy in that, and contingency in that. But it was built on the fact that from 2016 we have seen a lot of mobilization. I remember in 2018, right, before the elections again, there was so much discussion about agrarian power and what was going on. So I think you bring us back to Madhya Pradesh, to different points where this had taken off and what this builds on. And I think that's really important context. And then, as you say, you've kind of taken this emic categories. You've taken the terms the farmers' unions themselves use, this idea of Kala Kanun. What does black mean? What is hidden? What was really at stake there? Why did they feel it was not transparent? Or what they felt the agendas might be. And you've taken those terms seriously and tried to understand further. So I think those are some really important strengths, the bringing together of political economy and social movements, trying to stay with policy, right? I think in that, this is my response, I think on there's a little more nuancing that could have been possible, and maybe this is what a book like this makes possible for all of us to do, about the policy itself, right? So, I have been studying Mandis and APMC laws for, I think, now quite a long time, for 15 years continuously, but also studying their evolution over the last century. So, there is a deep history to the regulation of agricultural markets in India. And I think what is a little bit, something that needs further nuancing, and we'll come to MSP, but none of the 3 laws had anything to do with MSP. Right? They were actually agricultural market laws, which in fact explicitly mention in one of them that they're not around, they don't do anything to the MSP settlement. And there's a very particular reason, and you talk about this too. Why did people start to think? Why did farmers feel this was the withdrawal of the MSP system? And how has MSP procurement and APMC law come together? But I think on the subject of APMC law itself, what typically happens is you are either pro or anti-reform, which is a completely bizarre approach. It's like saying, if you think SEBI should improve regulation on a specific aspect of finance, you're pro-reform. But who will think that SEBI should not continuously innovate on reforms? Right? It's a regulator. Regulation is a dynamic sphere. So to pose this as people who are pro or anti-APMC reform, and actually this is the biggest problem that political parties, and I would say all political parties have done. They have said we want to, either it's abolish APMCs, right, or abolish APMC regulation. That was never the point. The point is, what kind of regulation do you need for your agricultural markets at different levels? And these agricultural produce marketing committees are agricultural markets at the primary level. So, I want to make one simple point. The original history of why we needed APMCs was actually about the fact that these are publicly regulated markets. Now I'm going to, the anthropologist, step in firmly on the ground of the economist, but we know this about market structure. Agricultural markets at the primary level are oligopsonistic or monopolistic markets. Why? Because in any given area, there will be a small number of buyers and a large number of sellers. It's just the local market structure, right? In any primary local market, this will be the structure. And therefore, the possibility of cartelization, the possibility of monopsony or oligopsony is very high. And therefore, you needed agricultural market regulation where you actually created public market sites where you could have open outcry auctions, where you could have fair weighment, and where you could have good settlement, right, of payments. This is true in any market where you would have exchange. You also needed to ensure that you handle issues of counterparty risk and you handle issues of dispute settlement. Anybody who has been to a market or has sold goods in any of these know these are vital issues. Now, the history of APMC law has been to try to get better and better at this. But of course, when we put it on the ground, 100 things have happened in particular areas, including capture, including resistance, including better weighment, including fighting for open auctions in certain places, including opening up the mandi system since 2000s, with companies like ITC in Madhya Pradesh where I worked, for example. This has been happening since 2004, right? And there has been a history of reform. Actually, the truth is most state governments, except for Punjab and Haryana, and actually Haryana has done many of these changes, but Punjab has had a harder time with APMC reforms on many fronts. But most other state governments had already enacted a variety of reforms, right, that have brought these changes into play. ENAM had already been launched in 2016, and ENAM has been running. This government has also said how well or it's slow progress, but it's working. So nothing stopped any of this from happening. As I said, ITC has been functioning since the mid-2000s in Madhya Pradesh. Cargill has been buying across the country in different places. Smaller businesses have also been buying. So the real problem, and I think this is somewhat missing in the book, the real problem is not that the law was proposing something different or everybody was on board with the law. The law actually fundamentally, especially the law on trade, broke with the original theory that you needed public regulation. And what happened? It radically deregulated, right? This is something that the farmers' unions from Punjab and Haryana articulated fairly well. But I would say that farmers' organizations as well as mandi people in other states articulated even better. Okay, and they did not necessarily come out in protest. That does not mean they felt these laws did not have problems or could not be addressed. So for example, I had many people call me from Madhya Pradesh to say, you know what has just happened? People have shown a PAN card, they've bought from 2 farmers, they haven't bought from the rest of the farmers and they've run away. What do you do under the law? You have to go to the SDM. But the law says that the 2 parties have to nominate people. But what do you do with an absconding trader? The law hadn't anticipated, right, and hadn't thought through what do you do about counterparty risk? What do you do if somebody runs away? Do you take advance tax? Do you have to register them somewhere? Similarly, for 100 years we've talked about market information. The main function of mandis is to tell you what happens in a market, what is the market price, and to disseminate this price. Now, if you have no recording mechanism for prices, how are farmers to understand and discover prices better? Right, I'll stop you. So, I think these kinds of design issues, this is why we needed to have this discussion before, right? Because when you discuss the technical matters, you can improve the quality of law, right? The second thing, therefore, and I think this is historic, you do mention it, is that it is the first time we had a central law on a state subject. And agricultural markets are state subjects, right? At primary agricultural markets. Trade is not. So had they only brought the Essential Commodities Act, actually the Essential Commodities Act is within the union government's powers, right? And what happened? Because they could not actually overturn APMC law legally, you created trade areas outside market areas. So you actually had regulatory uncertainty. States would control mandis, everything outside the state was suddenly deregulated. Right? This actually caused great confusion not only to farmers, but also to companies. Many of whom said, now we are not going to act till we know whether it will come under central legislation or under state legislation, because tomorrow we may have to pay tax and do other things, etc. Right? So the reason I'm mentioning this is because you're trying to do this work of bringing complex policy together with complex political economy, together with moral economy and social mobilization. The technical aspects and the deliberation on why we need public regulation, on why you need benchmarks, right? So some of us would say this during that time, that if you rapidly and dramatically deregulated financial markets in India, after the last 20 years we have really regulated these extensively, we would have found this extremely upsetting.
Like demonetization.
Yeah, and we would have found a rapid deregulation of stock market to be a very big problem. Agricultural markets require as much attention. They require as much expertise, if not more expertise, because we're talking about huge varietal and quality changes. And unfortunately, we didn't bring the collective wisdom, which is actually fairly deep in this country, on how to think about these markets, how to think about the right benchmarks, and to bring it back to your book and to bring it back to the movement. I think the farmers' movement, at least on the question of why public regulation is important, on the reason for why federalism in markets is important, and we need a mechanism. Again, no one is saying that we don't have to have integration, coordination, that we need better, more sophisticated, more capable mechanisms for coordination and cooperation. But they made the point, right? And what was very interesting and surprising was that state governments didn't. State governments actually publicly let farmers fight this out. Right? They let farmers be the face of this protest. Even when they disagreed, even when there were good grounds to discuss this deeply, they left it to the farmers to bear the brunt of this confrontation, right? And I think we need to go back to our state governments, if we are going to take federalism seriously, to get them to do much, much better thinking about how they need to regulate agricultural markets. Innovation is happening at the state level. We need to go back to that. But as you say, the gulf between policy and politics, and especially agrarian politics, is growing. The capacity to understand the complexity, and now we have Trump and the trade laws and so many other things that we have to contend with, all very complex, requiring far greater deliberation. Whether we have actually opened the space for greater deliberation and higher quality policy making and law making on agriculture, that is my concern. Which is that after a few years after, I think that space is still shrinking. It's moving in the direction of DBTs. We have more and more of our agricultural budget going towards DBTs. We need to think about agriculture as an economic sector, as a multiplier, and those things. Is it going to happen? How are we going to do it? I think those are really important questions. I'll stop you because I've taken a lot of time but I just wanted to emphasize the technical elements because these were qualitatively different. And it's not simply a question of pro and anti, in such a complex issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One thing that really comes out is that one of the causes of the farmer movement that happened was agriculture markets were not performing, and the laws that came out didn't seem to be helping with that cause. But Sudhir, most of agriculture markets in the world are not fair anywhere in the world. Yes. But still, agriculture markets is the least bad option that farmers have. And one question that I'll come back to you, Shamika, is that people really wonder is why governments don't deliberate with stakeholders. Now, when these laws came out, the government never deliberated with farmers. When the US-India trade deal happened, the government never consulted with farmer unions on what should be coming into the act or not act. The Economic Advisory Council, of which you are a member, doesn't talk to farmers. The Reserve Bank of India, which sets the interest rates and talks about inflation, does not talk to farmers. It only keeps saying, put the food inflation down, put the food inflation down. So, and while it's a fact that most of the knowledge that exists not with those in power or close to those in power, but it exists outside that sphere. So deliberations become a very, very important part of it. But Sudhir, I'll come back to you. And one of the things that this farmer movement did manage after it is that the government lost appetite for agriculture reforms. This is one of the consequences of this farmer movement is the government does not want to touch agriculture reforms. It prefers giving PM Kisan, as Shamika said, that make direct transfers. It prefers giving state electricity. It prefers giving 10,000 rupees to women in Bihar. Now Tamil Nadu is doing it. I think so Punjab is going to announce 1,000 rupees to every woman every month in a week's time. So the question to you is that, do you see any progress? Because you've written this book, you've gone deep into the book. As far as farmer movements is concerned, do you see any, and this goes out to everyone and then we'll open it up to questions. Do you see any progress in farmer livelihoods as a consequence of the movement that happened? Or will there be other processes that will happen that farmer livelihoods will increase? And just before you come, I also want to add, for example, it's a no-brainer, that you need to invest money in research to be investing. You had an AI summit, which was a wonderful summit. You're talking about AI, but the budget for agriculture research and development for the last 20 years or maybe 25 years has gone down in real terms every year. In fact, this time it's gone down in nominal terms also, I think. But if you can't make a government understand the very simplest things of basic things, how a farmer livelihood is going to improve? So Sudhir, that's a question to you. And Shamika, I'm really happy to say that you are here, because when Sudhir mentioned that we could invite you, I said governments normally would not come for a book on farmer power book. So I'm really thankful that you did come and really appreciate your I would say, what is the point of being courageous to come for a book release like this?
No, not at all. I think that is the pre-held notion which does great injustice to the fact that somebody thought it relevant to write a whole book. Right? The problem hasn't gone away, by the way. Right? Now, we do talk to farmers a day. The only thing is, we are increasingly seeing representation from fisheries, from horticulture. We are seeing efforts at diversifying the crops. And some of the fastest growing sectors in agriculture are exactly that. fisheries and dairies and fresh fruits and so on. So there is a whole world of agriculture out there which is growing fast and is adopting technology and is modernizing. But this book is not about any of that. And that is why I say this is a symptom, not the disease. Right? And I will talk about Punjab again for the simple reason that it troubles me that this, of course it's also a border state, but it is giving us lessons for what not to do also. Right? Now think of, when I look at consumption expenditure data, right, which we know that in the last 12 years, and the reason I say 12 is not for any other reason but the fact that the household consumption expenditure data, so don't read too much. I think the problem with public discourse in India is politics overhangs everything else. Very few of you actually read the research. And that's why conversations stay so superficial. What does household consumption expenditure survey tell you? That an average Indian of every quintile group, not just the rich people, but the poorest 20%, is consuming fewer food grains every month. And a substantial, it is 2 kilograms lesser rice and wheat per month, per person. There's a drastic decline in consumption of food grains, cereals. What are they consuming more of? Milk and milk products, fresh fruits, eggs, fish and meat. Processed food is for just the 20%, top 20%, but yes, it is increasing. But you see what is happening in terms of consumption. Now, if you're going to tell me that the farm reforms and agriculture as a sector is not going to respond to this massive change in demand, then we have a bigger problem. But the farmers across the country are indeed responding. So this is not agriculture. This is not a national problem, which is what I'm trying to tell you here. This is an isolated problem of a region, and that's why we need to go to the root of the problem. We have to talk about where is future growth going to come from. And even if it is within agriculture, exactly the kind of things Mikla spoke about. Several states have already brought in those. And I think that is also the beauty of a large federal system, right? That there are many things which states are very quietly doing. Very quietly, they're just doing a lot of these things that we are just pontificating in Delhi. And that's where real growth is stemming from. It's not rocket science, right? A lot of that is coming from. Now, the larger issue about representation, and in an electoral democracy, the more you have, the more conversations, the better decision you are likely to end up with, right? But the case with DBTs or most forms of cash transfer is this, that economists across the world, if you look at empirical evidence on what DBTs or cash transfers have done, almost always they lead to better outcome. Cash transfers have not just come out as an electoral tool in India. The empirical evidence from Mexico, from Uganda, from Bolivia, from Eastern Europe, cash transfer programs have often yielded better results than many other alternatives, right? Now, why is it that state governments are moving in that direction? It seems like an easier thing to do. That is true. Is that an alternative to a lot of the difficult things? No, it is not. Because we are just saying, yes, we'll cut out everything, we'll give you the final beneficiary cash in hand. So you are saying, okay, it's fine, it's good for me and I'm going to make choices. But there are fundamental institutional things, matters which need government intervention, which will require these kind of negotiations. Right? And so you're likely to see this as a continuous. This is not a problem. If we state it as a problem, it's not going away. We are likely to see these kind of negotiations. And as much as farmers, when you mentioned in the beginning, Sudhir, that it was a lack of negotiation skill, a lot of it is coordination problem. Right? The fact that 86% farmers in the country, at least in theory, supported or wanted these reforms, were not coordinated enough to come out and make a representation. We didn't hear a lot of that either. So sometimes protests also take a life of their own and all kinds of other things, enter the conversation. And I think somewhere we lose focus on what is the fundamental objective here, right? So going beyond the politics, if I say my ultimate objective is let's say per capita income, that is number one, of farmers. Second, ecological balance. And somehow that conversation is missing from a lot of the conversations we have in agriculture. That what will eventually lead to a more balanced growth even within agriculture, there the ecological costs will have to be incorporated. We cannot just push it down generations and pretend that today, as long as everything is quiet, we are okay. No, we're just again pushing the problems further on.
I can just quickly come in, and I'll be very quick here, but I think Shamika, I completely agree with you on the point that cash transfers do something, but they are not a substitute for deep either regulatory action that is required by government and in many cases service delivery action. When you talk about public health, public education, these are not things that you can easily sort out. Even if you believe in vouchers, even if you believe in all these other things, you will still need public systems to deliver in certain core areas, and you need regulation to deliver. So for example, a cash transfer is not going to help farmers with price discovery or with getting better payment or payment practices or credit or other things in the market which they need as entrepreneurs, right? So I think we cannot get away from these, and the conflation is important. I think there are two areas where I think there's a little bit of nuance. I don't think even theoretically 86% of farmers supported.
You're very diplomatic, you use the word nuance.
Right? I don't think the fact that they did not protest was not a sign of support. Were they supporting, in theory, better markets? Yes. Did the bills and the acts give us better ordinances and the acts give us better markets? I think it's very debatable. Even they got it. Like they wanted mandis. So in fact, near where you live in Jarad, I remember going to farmers in that area in 2020, and they said, "Hame mandi chahiye. We want a functioning mandi so that we have a benchmark. We don't want a free-for-all where anybody can buy and sell. That's anyway happening. Everybody is anyway selling in their village. It's worth asking, right? That basically Bihar has been an unregulated, deregulated market since 2006. And it hasn't helped farmers in Bihar. Why? Right? Because what you need is deep changes in the way in which farmers in Bihar engage in markets. So we went to corporates and to others in Bihar, none of whom buy directly from farmers. They all buy from market intermediaries. There's less price discovery, there's less clarity. Bihar is a place doing very well on fruits and vegetables, relatively, right? Those markets are thriving. You still need these kinds of investments, right? So it was not about complete deregulation, and I think the non-participation of those farmers in active protest in Delhi, I don't think was going along with it. I think part of it was actually wanting something deeper, wanting actual engagement in their lives, right? Policy engagement, which they weren't getting. And so there was a lot of feeling that now what are we going to get? It's not good. I'll tell you on the MSP front, and this is the other thing. I think you mentioned very rightly the fast-growing areas of agriculture. But we need to remember that this is still a country where over 70%, let's say 68% informally, right, with the NFSA. And during these years, COVID, we had maximum procurement and distribution because we needed it, right? The policy also was an increase in grain because that is what we had reserves of. This is a system that the Indian state, union and states have invested in for 50 years. It is not a system that was produced by farmers in Punjab. Neither the Green Revolution nor the public procurement and distribution system is an invention of farmers in Punjab. It was a union policy which over 50 years has deepened this dilemma and dynamic, right? So, do we have to find a solution to it? Yes. But is it of their making? No. So, there another small correction. You say that the decentralized procurement program for wheat and paddy has not been tried out by states. That's not true. Since 2008, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Telangana, Odisha, all of these states have invested considerably in decentralized procurement and distribution and have improved their capacities as well, right? So, while I completely agree diversification has to be something we take on, the answer to why we have a PDS, right? In fact, other countries are now thinking about the importance of having buffer stocks, having strong public distribution systems. We need a better, more active public procurement and distribution system. It needs to be more diversified, both in terms of what we procure and what we distribute. It doesn't mean that we should have everything taken over by government, right? I mean, if you look at Punjab and Haryana, the way I often used to describe the dynamics we used to see, Punjab was all state and no market in their mandis. Bihar was all market and no state. Neither was working for farmers, either on income or agroecology, right? Or public value. So it is that optimum combination which is extremely hard, needs to be negotiated and must be worked on. And in the absence of that, I think we will end up with a problem. So I do think the state plays a very critical role there.
Thank you. Shall I just take a question?
Yes, please.
You want to come in later?
Yeah,
You want
a
to come in
couple of
now?
points as you would plan.
No, you can come in now. Then we'll open it up to questions. But Sudhir, because when you went through this, I have a question for you because you share. It is working. It is working. Is why don't any political party have farmer leaders anymore? You know, BJP, Congress.
Is that true?
Yes, no political party has farmer leaders now. They have no.
That's a
relevance.
career prospect for you, Ajay.
No. I had the option and I gave it up long ago. And,
Maybe part of your answer.
so why don't? So I mean, it has to do with this movement and agitation. Is that have farmers become so irrelevant that political parties don't even need symbolic leaders in the hierarchy? You know, you wear a white kurta pajama, farmers are not stupid, but I think so all political parties think like that. So if you have an opinion on that or on the discussion, and then we'll just open it up for questions.
So Ajay, can I add a little bit to
Yeah.
the question?
So Alok Sinha ji, former IS officer. Yeah.
You know, the fact that these farmers' protests did not show any of the agri-laborer from from Bihar, UP, working in Punjab. It seemed that there is a deliberate decision to show it as a Punjabi agitation.
I don't know.
One second.
Yeah.
So therefore, do you think that it is because the 86% is deliberately kept out of the farmers' movement? Because the farmers' movement becomes an land-owning driven farmers' movement. It does not welcome the landless laborer and the marginal farmer who actually are driving Indian
If
agriculture.
there was a union leader here, he'd say you're trying to divide farmers. But anyway, I'll give this question to you, Sudhir.
Sudhir says that it was more.
No, but I want Sudhir to
Yeah, I like
talk
Sudhir to
on that.
answer.
Why is it that there was no Purabia face to the farmers? Punjab is full of them.
Thank you so much
It's working.
for all these points. I think I am feeling that the purpose of the book is the purpose of the book is fulfilled. Where it tries to actually raise some of these questions, and I'm glad that it was able to do that. Thank you for these questions. I think one thing which we can see from this discussion itself, that the issue is quite complex. When we look at it from a black and white perspective, it tends to create problems. It's not an issue which can have actually very simplified answers. Now, there is one way in which this book tries to actually bring out this complexity. I would not say answers, I don't think I have answers, but the complexity comes out in the form of this chapter on the policy debates. And there is one term which I would say deliberately use, that the state appeared quite confused while dealing with this issue. Now, what does it mean when I say that it appeared confused? Some of the points which both of you actually highlighted, that the state was actually trying to find solution to a national problem when it was actually not a national problem. So, in fact, it was the state which stepped in and said that, okay, we will have a pan-Indian law. Whereas, if we look at the policy documents which have actually come out even after 2014, after this government came, all these policy documents, I think I can use this word, all these policy documents highlighted that role of state is essential. We need public regulation, but at the same time what we need is the entry of the market forces. And this particular aspect of this policy, the agricultural reform policy, was not something which happened only after 2014. If you look at the debate since late 2000, there is actually a consensus on these issues. Now why I call it confused, that even when the government had these recommendations, what it actually turned out to be is something drastically different from this, which is a sudden deregulation. Now, why did that happen? I think that is a question which some of my younger colleagues need to explore in their PhDs. What actually prompted the state to do that? Now, I don't think, again, it is that simple answer when one says that it was because of corporate interest and so on. I don't think actually it was that. And I agree with one point which you have been mentioning, that perhaps the intent was something else, but what came out from it was something very different. The second point is about this question that only Punjab and Haryana farmers, we usually ignore the farmers from Western UP who also came in big numbers. But at the same time, I think that the very reason behind this title is that not everybody is powerful enough to articulate the demands. And actually it was the farmers of these regions who were powerful enough to articulate it. Now, not every state's farmer unions have the capacity to pay for such a massive mobilization. Farmers from Karnataka can't afford tractor trolleys bringing all the way to Delhi and then protest here. Similarly, I mean, Manish, who is here, who is working on some of these questions, and he is looking at Bihar, and he looks at it from a very interesting perspective, that unions in Bihar find difficult even to collect 100 rupees from farmers in one crop season. Whereas in case of Punjab and Haryana, farmers are willing to pay for unions. That's what makes Punjab and Haryana farmers, if one calls them powerful enough to raise their issues. And finally, one quick point, and then perhaps we can open it up. I think one thing which all three of you highlighted and we agreed upon, that we need better coordination mechanism when we are devising policy solutions. And somewhere I think it applies on both sides. Even the unions find it difficult to have innovative negotiating tactics, and even the government at times is actually not in a position to come up with something really innovative when it is negotiated. And that's what you see when the negotiations were happening. Actually both were buying time. Negotiations were not happening practically. Now why? I think because both sides lacked more ideas to negotiate. But that's not only a domain which you can talk in agricultural policy. You will see it in other policy domains also. I think as a democracy we need to be more innovative. In one of the sessions, the BKS CPS seminar which we do, in one of the sessions it was highlighted that how in Europe the state itself supports unions. State itself promotes unions to be more organized so that they have a more organized voice. I think we still lack that in India. Of course, we are a very complex country with very complex realities of farming, but still I think we need to think on those terms. How do we involve unions in this entire exercise? Now, because we don't have an organized mechanism, you have around 80 different unions functioning in Punjab. You don't really know who is whom to talk when the government is really, if at all, wanting to talk. And finally, about the agricultural reform question, I don't think actually government has given up. So, in fact, after the farm laws, if I say what they could accomplish, I think they were actually fighting for status quo, which they achieved. One. And two, we have seen multiple policy options which government started promoting. Whether successful or not, that's a different question. For example, the farmer producer organizations, special focus on cooperatives. There's a massive focus on cooperatives after 1950s when Nehru actually wanted to do that. And thirdly, a focus on packs and decentralized procurement, which you rightly mentioned that it was actually tried in some states, but such a massive support from union government was not the case. So I think what the government eventually did, it realized that there are certain sectors which it should not touch upon, which was, whether desirable or undesirable outcome of the movement. And second, it also decided that okay, we need some other mechanisms to intervene in this sector. So, I mean, what the book is trying to do is to look at some of these shades, maybe sometimes successfully, sometimes may not be. But these shades need to be highlighted in this entire debate. I think that's what the movement was all about. To say that, okay, these are the shades which have to figure in. So thank you both. Thank you.
Very well said, Sudhirji, very well said. We can continue to disagree after this. We already had chai. Actually, there's no chai after the event, but there's no chai but charcha after this. But let me, as a moderator, let me just add that government is not doing anything for agriculture reforms, right? What you're talking about are not reforms. FPO started much before the farmer movement started. But we'll take up questions. Gavin, can you please take the mic? So two things. You have to introduce yourself and ask a question. You're not a panelist, so limit yourself to a question, not to long comments, which is a general tendency. Not only in farmer-related issues, but in other events also. So, if there's any questions to the panelist or to the author, and please take the piche hai.